Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Drapers Connects. My name is Graham Moran, and I am the Associate Editor here at Drapers. Drapers Connects is our series of webinars, panels, and discussions with the aim of connecting the industry and discussing the most challenging or interesting topics of the day. Thank you all for joining us. If you are watching live on Zoom, please feel free to interact with us via the Q&A function. You can send your questions in for our panel, and we'll do our best to answer them either throughout the conversation or at the end. In partnership with Vaayu, today we will explore how fashion brands and retailers can reduce their carbon footprint. I'm very happy to welcome today's panel of experts. Joining us, we have Marissa Horndon, the CEO of jewellery business Missoma. Hello, Marissa.
Hi, how are you?
Good thing. We have Namrata Sandhu, who is the CEO and co-founder of climate tech startup Vaayu. Hi, Namrata. And then we also have Ruth Zora, who is the Global Chief Client Success Officer at retail consultancy Wunderman Thompson Commerce. Thank you for joining us, Ruth. And thank you all for watching us, taking part and participating, hopefully, and we're going to have a great discussion today. As I said, today's webinar is in partnership with Vaayu, so Nam will kick us off with an introduction to the business. Over to you, Nam.
Sure. Thanks, Graham. So really briefly, just to explain what Vaayu is, I think Graham mentioned already, but we are basically a software solution that's focused on retailers and helping retailers particularly both calculate and reduce their carbon impact. And by reduction, we mean ways that retailers can optimize their own business, their deliveries, their packaging, their products to basically have less impact on the climate.
Okay, thank you, Nam. So today, as I said, we are going to be discussing the importance of decarbonising the retail industry and hopefully discussing some ways that we can do that. Climate change, of course, affects all of us. And as we know, brands and retailers need to be doing what they can and acting now. Conversations around carbon footprint, carbon offsetting aren't necessarily anything new within the industry, and progress is being made. Just this week, as an example, I saw that came out in the news, luxury leather brand Mulberry have released a new collection that claims to be fully carbon neutral from field to shop floor. And that's part of its commitment to become net zero by 2035. So there are things that the industry is doing, and there's also more that we can do. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Now, I thought I would start with you. You have lots of experience in the sustainability space. Before launching Vaayu, you were most recently head of sustainability and ethical trade at Zalando, which I'm sure was a very interesting role. I wanted to ask you, why is it so important that we as an industry focus on this topic, focus on decarbonising the industry in any ways that we can?
Yeah, so I think as almost everyone listening and everyone is aware, climate is kind of one of the biggest issues of this decade. And I think we know a lot more needs to be done. I've worked in sustainability my entire career, both on kind of the human rights and the environmental side. But I think the kind of environmental situation we're in and the kind of timeline we're working to 2030 means that the issue has become a lot more pressing. And I think the need for action is really important right now. And I think we're kind of at the tipping point, as we all say, where if we don't act fast enough now, the kind of impact will be devastating. So I think that's why there's more need than ever before to kind of focus in on carbon and climate specifically. And I think for us, it's basically enabling retailers to have the tools they need to be able to make some of those decisions and understand the impact of their decisions. So I think we came in because we saw that there was a need in the space, something that I saw when I was working at Zalando previously, and I think across a lot of other retailers. So it's really to help build that bridge and give retailers the tools to understand their impact first. And I think the understanding is the first part, and then only can you take some action.
Yeah, definitely. Marissa, at Missoma, you are working on a number of different initiatives in the sustainability space. Cutting carbon is part of several of them. I wondered why that has become part of your overarching strategy, sustainability strategy, and particularly you are working with NAM and Vaayu, why you've decided to kind of make carbon one of your long-term focuses.
Well, I think that, we've been concerned about the number of obviously packages that go out as a, online brand. We are sending out packages every day, and especially during those peak periods. So, during our Black Friday, Christmas peak period, obviously it really ramps up. And so since 2018, actually, we've been planting sort of sapling trees with Tree Sisters. And we thought, right, yes, we're going to continue doing that. That's very, very important to us. But what more can we do the rest of the year? Because that was really only something we were doing during Black Friday to try and offset that particular shopping period. So when we heard about Vaayu and what they were doing through our sustainability manager, we were really excited at the fact that this was a more longer term project. And just the fact that we were accountable to the data and that it was real time. And I think that obviously there's a lot of brands doing, carbon compensating, and that's amazing, and it's really great that so many people have become aware of this, but they're also doing it manually, and so obviously there's a lot of room for for error. And I think what was so great is you integrate Vaayu into your back end, and therefore it is real-time, precise, accountable data that allows you to compensate for all of our deliveries going out and all of our returns. And obviously there's more we can do, so eventually in the future we would like to implement that on our inbound as well, but like we've always said, it's one step at a time. But no, we were really proud to be the first jewelry online retailer to onboard Vaayu, and we're really proud of the work you guys are doing. And so for us now, we're celebrating 1 year of carbon compensating through Vaayu, and it's really amazing to also see like the different projects that you can choose to then get involved with to offset and compensate your carbon sort of emissions. So it's very varied, and you can choose a whole variety of what is important to you, but we're sort of, let's say, supporting, and obviously there's full transparency on our website. You can read about each one of the different projects, but it's indigenous communities in the Peruvian rainforest, or there's protecting endangered wildlife in Kenya, and there's also, we've chosen 3 projects, saving tropical forests in southwest Cambodia. So it's really amazing to not only have that real-time data, be accountable for it, our customer know that they can also see that level of transparency, and then see where we're focusing those projects.
Excellent, thank you. Ruth, from your point of view, you work with a number of different businesses from across the industry. From your angle, why do you think this is such an important topic that the industry needs to be focusing on with their sustainability strategies? And also, Wunderman Thompson have collaborated with Vaayu, and I was interested to understand kind of why you decided to kind of offer that to the brands and businesses that you work with.
Yeah, well, listen, I will start with the retail aspect of that question, right? We, as you said, we work with very many different brands. We help them build their commerce platforms, operate those commerce platforms, and support them throughout the entire commerce journey. And when it came to our own sustainability strategies, we identified a huge opportunity to help clients shift from thinking about carbon reduction to actually implementing very tangibly carbon reduction strategies. It's no surprise to many people. In fact, the British Retail Council has documented this, that retail as an industry emits significantly more greenhouse gas emissions to the environment than even road transport. And so we felt there was a huge opportunity for us to help clients within the retail space to tackle the climate crisis. And it just so happened that we chanced upon Vaayu, and we thought our objectives were very well aligned. Where I think the partnership between us and Vaayu makes a big difference to clients is in providing that immediate feedback loop that is missing in many of these processes. The model today is predominantly a consultancy/services-led model, where you have specialist consultants come, do an assessment, do a data collection, produce a report, and then pack their bags and go. And so the organization is left with very little information to really implement those recommendations on a day-to-day basis. We're now able to mitigate that through the access to that information via Vaayu, and to be able to provide clients with the opportunities to prioritize those sustainability initiatives, communicate those programs much more accurately to consumers, and to very tangibly understand the impact of their actions on their carbon reduction efforts, both short-term as well as into much longer-term horizons like their net zero targets. So for me, it really becomes a game changer in how we support clients within the retail space to deliver on carbon reduction promises, not only on offsetting or removal strategies.
So well put.
Yes, I saw you nodding, Marissa.
I wish I could be that eloquent.
I see we have quite a few extra people join, so just want to remind our audience that you can send in questions via the Q&A function, which I believe will be at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for the panel or anything you'd like to add, please do send it in. So beyond that introduction, I thought it would be interesting for our audience to kind of get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of this. What can be done? What are brands and businesses like Missoma, for example, doing? It's all well and good saying it needs to happen, but now maybe we could start with you. What advice do you have for brands and retailers, or our audience, of where to start? That is kind of what we keep coming back to at Drapers. Is we all know that we need to make progress, but where do we begin?
Yeah, and I think the first thing I would say is just to start. And I think starting somewhere is what all of the brands and businesses need to do. And I think sustainability can seem really complex, really overwhelming. There's a lot of interdependencies and it can start to get overwhelming really fast. So I think finding a point to start and kind of think of it as an iterative journey. And I think Marissa already mentioned that kind of at Missoma, they wanted to start somewhere, and you start with something and you keep iterating and you keep improving. And I think that's absolutely the approach to sustainability. I've worked in this space a long time, and we've always seen that that's the way you can bite off the big piece and kind of constantly keep iterating. So I think that's the one big piece. And I think when it comes to kind of climate and carbon more specifically, I think the first thing you can do is just calculate your carbon emissions. That's got to be the first place you start, because first you need to understand where are the emissions coming from, what are the emissions, to then inform the decision making, which is where can I start to have the most impact. And I think where we really come in is one, automating and making the calculation real time, so you can start to understand that impact, and then as a next step, starting to make recommendations of where can you improve that footprint. And I think the calculation, at least on the carbon side, is kind of always the first place to start.
But you are right, it's one step at a time. And you just need to put that, sort of foot out, take that first step, and then everything is an evolution. We're always just trying to improve what we do. None of us are perfect. We just need to constantly be striving to do better or do more.
Definitely. We've actually already had my next question. I was going to ask. We've already had a question from the audience around this. Now, I was going to ask you if you could talk us through this kind of balance, or if there is a balance between retrospective action. So you've done it, you've created it, and then you want to kind of, maybe fix isn't the right word, but offset is maybe the better word. And the difference between that and maybe preventative solutions before the fact. As we kind of possibly move beyond simply offsetting carbon. The audience has asked is there any examples of that? And I know there are. So could you talk to us about that balance of being preventative or retrospective?
Yeah, and I think a big part of the challenge around kind of the prevention and understanding and kind of as you called it, fixing or understanding the impact before you kind of make the decisions has always been around data and the lack of visibility to understand what that impact is, to then be able to make those changes before they happen, rather than try to go back in time and change the decisions you made. So I think the one big piece there is around how do you basically understand the impact of those decisions while you're making them. And I think there was a specific question around, are there examples of reductions? There absolutely are. And I think some really specific ones that we see a lot with e-commerce is around kind of moving your 3PL or your logistics provider. So where you ship a lot of goods from kind of Europe to the US, for example, we see a lot of businesses starting to understand that that has a huge impact on their footprint and starting to put in a 3PL or a third-party logistics provider in the US. And then the data can tell you, should it be on the East Coast? Should it be on the West Coast? Should it be in the middle of the US? Where even in the US is the best place to put that third-party logistics provider? And we've seen brands save significant carbon by doing that. Some of other examples are businesses understanding the impact of their packaging. So if you change your packaging materials, how much impact and carbon can you save? And it's quite a lot, actually, because everything goes out in a package. And then kind of understanding, if you reduce your packaging size, which is your kind of volume and efficiency of your packaging, by 10% or 20%, you have big carbon savings you can make. So in kind of every part of the journey, there are big savings to be had. And I think as businesses understand, based on their model, their delivery footprint, how their goods move around, I think there's different savings for different businesses, basically. And those decisions basically can inform some of the decisions they make and how they kind of choose to do things.
Anyone have anything?
Yeah, Graham, if I may jump in on this one as well. I think the point that Nam makes around the access to that data is very important for business reasons. And what I mean by that is, it is very elusive to understand how those sustainability programs have an impact on the business without access to that regular carbon footprint calculation. The other piece that's very important is around the prioritization of resources, because let's face it, most of the businesses that we work with don't have a blank checkbook to fund everything that they would like to fund on any given fiscal year. I'm sure Marissa can tell us a little bit more about those constraints, right? Yeah. So it's very important for us. So it's very important for us to help clients prioritize those actions, and having that ready access to the data to be able to prioritize based on impact versus effort between short-term and long-term becomes incredibly important. We have seen it, from some of the work that we've done around business optimization. We have a big capability in that space, that you can generate double-digit percentage decreases in packaging waste, which you can understand will have a significant impact in terms of bottom line savings. Mm-hmm. But equally, applying optimization to your van capacity, to your routes, can also bring significant, and more importantly, are good for the environment. So that.
Oh, I think we may have lost you.
Problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
You might need to try turning your camera off. I think if I jump in while she's trying to sort out that, I think, yes, there are so many different areas you need to focus on. And what we try and do is say, right, what is the priority for this year? Or it might be the next 6 months. So about 18 months ago, we did a whole project to, as you said, Nam, reduce our packaging. And so our box size was, I don't know, the size of a laptop. And now it's about, I would say, an A6, sort of booklet size for the average package. Obviously, it depends how much you order, but if it's 4 boxes and under, we fit it in a much smaller, and it's all recyclable, and we changed all of our boxes from having a plastic hinge to being fully recyclable, soy inks, etc. The next year, we looked at, okay, how can we bring in the recycled metals? So recycled silver, then recycled gold. This year, it will be about recycled brass. And then in the factories, auditing, right, who is using recycled water, solar energy, and every single year there just have to be new projects. But sometimes some do get put off because you might not have, as you said rightly, Ruth, the finances, like we did put off our US 3PL because, you know, it was a £200,000 project and we know the benefits of it, but, you know, we've had to delay it for 6 months, but it doesn't mean that it is off the roadmap. It's just that you can only do so much in one given, you know, year. So you have to be realistic as well. But I think as long as you're always making those steps forward and, you know, you set yourself goals, you might not achieve all of them, but you have to be transparent with your customer on what you have achieved and why you haven't achieved what you haven't.
Yeah, definitely. I think Ruth is back, hopefully. Thank you for that. I think we're all good now. I was actually, as you've touched on there, Marissa, we talk a lot about having to be transparent and open and honest with your consumers, with your audience. And I wanted to ask the panel the conversation around carbon, and I think maybe understanding of the topic is a bit further ahead with the consumer than maybe some of the topics. It's something, you know, that we're all a bit more aware of, maybe. And I wondered if anyone had any advice from that side, you know, of kind of relaying this to your customers and talking to your customers about what you're doing in this space. If there's any sort of strategies, maybe Ruth, with some of the brands and businesses that you've worked on in this space, from a consumer point of view, and kind of helping with their understanding of this topic. Should we give you a go?
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, let's hope that my internet collaborates on this response. We believe there's a very important role for creativity to play in this. Being able to communicate sustainability programs in a way that are relatable to the consumer is very important. I think part of the issue in driving that understanding even further than where it is today is in providing the metrics of sustainability in a way that consumers can understand and relate to their day-to-day lives, right? So I think creativity has an important role to play in helping us translate that. And we've been very successful at working with our clients on delivering that messaging. The second piece is, I think we've seen a bit of a backlash because of companies being accused of greenwashing. And so I feel there's a lot of hesitation on the client side, on the brand side, to communicate the initiatives that they work on much more publicly to the consumer because they are afraid that they're going to be attacked of greenwashing. What we've seen from our experience is that being transparent and being accurate with some of those calculations, where I think what Vaayu is doing today becomes quite key, is very important. And to Marissa's point, you know, being able to be authentic with them and to say, listen, we've done some things very well, but maybe we've fallen short in other areas, and really balancing that dialogue with the consumer is quite key. And the third piece would be around the consumer choice, right? I think part of the reason why we haven't progressed as much in the adoption of sustainable alternatives within consumer shopping journeys is because that sustainable choice isn't always the easiest choice, isn't always the most obvious choice. And I think there we have a responsibility as enablers of that experience and as partners for brands to be able to articulate those choices to the consumer in a more evident way so they can do what's right for them, but equally what's right for the environment.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. Putting it in terms that are relatable. So when we talk about for each shipment, we say it's 1.79 kilograms of carbon dioxide. No one knows what that is. I don't know what that is. So Vaayu helped us calculate it. We were like, what does that mean? And so we say it's the equivalent of charging a smartphone 22 times or driving 0.4 miles. And you're like, oh, okay, thanks. That makes sense. And I think that was the kind of the data and the accuracy and that they were able to give us that made us feel really confident. And again, I felt that we didn't need to be relying on, again, human error. If you're calculating it yourself with your different, shipping partners, DPD, FedEx, DHL, I mean, all these different carriers, we were like, okay, this goes through every single order on the back end. We can, that's real-time data and it's auditable. And so we feel really confident in what we're saying. But equally, you are right. When something doesn't, necessarily go to plan, when we were changing over to recycled metals, there were two factories that we found it much harder to do because they were outside of an import-export zone, and it took about a year longer. And we said, this is why we haven't achieved our goal of 100% recycled metals yet, because actually, rather than changing factories, because, you know, we're trying to go into recycled metals, we are supporting our, you know, team in these factories because it's actually more about the sustainability of livelihoods, and we're responsible to those people as well. So I think you just need to put it into real terms, like something that everyone can relate to and understand.
Yeah. Do you think, have you found the response from your, there's a question already from the audience to Marissa about that. When you put it in those kind of relatable terms, you know, charging your phone this many times, etc., what have you seen a response from your consumers?
Yeah, I think we do a lot of research into, you know, how our consumer, you know, thinks, purchases, what decisions they're making when they purchase. And definitely our consumer is very conscious of, you know, price, of, you know, sustainability, and they do go and do their research, and they go and research and compare. And so we're really happy that we're able to almost give them that information there and, you know, in front of them as they're making that purchase. I definitely think we don't probably get it out there enough, and we don't put it in front of our customer enough, and we're trying to tell more stories around it, because I think it's really about, you know, as you said, with storytelling, explaining to them, these are the regions that, you know, we are, you know, then compensating, and these are the projects we're, you know, obviously helping to support. Go and look them up here, and this is what each one of our factories are doing, and this is the data behind them. So everything just needs to be telling a story as much as possible, and a lot of that time, as you said, creatively, visually as well, you know. I think we've seen a really good response. There was one occasion, a couple of occasions, like when we changed our packaging to fully recycled, it no longer had that like flip top, which like did, you know, feel and look more luxurious. And I remember a couple of people going, oh, your new packaging just really isn't as good, much prefer the old one, blah, blah, blah. And I actually got involved there because, I mean, normally I'm not the one answering, and I went, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I do totally understand, because it's not quite as nice, right? And I said, but we've spent a year researching this. It's soy inks, it's, you know, fully, you know, recycled, it's FSC certified papers, this, that, and the other. And we took out the hinge because it was plastic. And so now this is fully recyclable. So we're really proud of it. I'm so sorry it's not quite, you know, the same experience. And that immediately went, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. That makes absolute sense. Now I really understand and appreciate, you know, why you've made this decision. So I think, again, we haven't told the story well enough, and that's on us, but it's also nice to be able to tell our customers why we've made that decision.
Yeah, definitely. I love that story. I know we spoke about it beforehand, but, you know, somebody thought, oh, you know, this is terrible, why have you done this? But then when
it's a lift up.
Yeah, as we've all as you've all said, it's once you explain why we're making, as a business, you're making those decisions, and hopefully that's you know, the consumer comes on board.
And I actually think it's still too nice. I think we're now going to go next time in our next round even simpler and even more basic, because I think now the customer is also ready. You know, we're all evolving and we're all, you know, learning as we go to receive something even smaller and even simpler. But I think you just need to, you know, each time improve.
Yeah. Well, we've kind of touched on a few of them, but my plan was to delve a little deeper into some of the areas where we could, you know, put some of our energy, put some of our focus. I know, Marissa, you did touch on deliveries, of course, being a predominantly direct-to-consumer and online business. There are a lot of deliveries, and obviously through lockdown and the pandemic, this only kind of increased. This is one of the areas that you're focusing on, and you have touched on it, but could you tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing kind of in the delivery space, and kind of any differences that's made?
In the delivery space, I mean, we are 95% D2C, so it is about 95% of our deliveries and returns. I think that's really important to say, because otherwise, you know, you might be thinking, oh, 50%, and actually, well, what about the other 50%? So we did feel that this is, you know, a very tangible amount. So obviously, I've already talked to you about the packaging, and I think what people don't realize is that kind of project does take about a year. Like, you know, even developing one of our pieces, you know, it's not done overnight, and there has to be a lot of research that is done into it and into the chain of custody and the certification. And I always say you're only as good as the chain of custody. And I think that's where brands, as you said earlier, can be scared of any calls of greenwashing, but I think if you're confident in the chain of custody and having seen each one of those certificates, then I think, and that's where your sustainability manager or whoever is in charge of that project, that's what their responsibility is. We also, we do want to look at inbound deliveries. I think that would be the next step, and we also want to look at our plastic, and we're sort of testing out starch. We're going to be testing out starch alternatives, but then that needs to be tested with the jewelry, and does that react? And there's a lot more complexities, and then obviously there are the cost implications as well, so you need to factor that into your margins. But no, we're really proud to say that it was a huge project, and now it is all 100% recycled, recyclable, and choosing the materials as well. I think now we've got an ultra suede, and now I'm looking at maybe I think I want to use a linen. So every single time we're trying to improve the materials we're using, and then we look at all the other areas as well. So it's not just on the packaging. There is the metals, there's the factories. There's a lot of different areas you need to be looking at, but it's one thing at a time.
And Graham, on that point, I think it's also important to highlight that all of these elements are interrelated, right? To Marissa's point, every choice that she makes from a packaging perspective will have an impact on the emissions that are derived from that package throughout transit, right? So the heavier the packaging, the bulkier the packaging, the more of an impact it would have from a carbon footprinting perspective. So all of these choices, starting with the product, into the primary packaging, down into the secondary packaging for transport, they all add up. And so you may think that you're making a small change from a product perspective or from a primary packaging perspective, but this could have a significant impact, a significant knock-on effect on the rest of your carbon footprint as well. And Nam is much better placed than me to talk about that. But I think that's important because particularly when you're dealing with such a fragmented ecosystem, and the delivery space is perhaps the best example of that. Marissa already mentioned at least 3 to 4 of the leading 3PL providers. Having the opportunity to understand how you as a company, how you as a brand can help mitigate some of that impact, even when you're using third-party providers, is very important. That puts you much more in control, and it really helps you justify those choices vis-a-vis the shareholders and more importantly to the consumer as well.
And you just look at what the third-party providers are doing as well. So, we are using them as partners, right? And just like Vaayu is a partner, what are their, carbon compensating activities and goals? How are they becoming more green, more electric cars, etc. And I think, for us, the biggest thing was reducing the box size. And again, that came from a customer, and that's what we really loved. About 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, they said, we absolutely love your package, but you know what, it's quite big for a tiny piece of jewelry. And we were all into the, how the customer receives it, the journey. And so now the big challenge is how can we still have a beautifully branded experience, recycled tissue paper, recycled sticker, but now, we've been reducing what we put in there, how we package it. Let's make it as, small as possible. And I think it is difficult when you are a smaller brand because you can only afford one size of box, right? Because there's minimum quantities. And as we got bigger, we said, right, we are now going to do 3 sizes of boxes, and we use a bigger one a lot less, but we used to have one size for all, the medium size. So by obviously being bigger and being able to do, different volume kind of, negotiating deals with our, packaging supplier, changing to that smaller one, which probably is, I'm trying to think, 65% of our, deliveries is going to be under 4 pieces, probably under 2 pieces, but you can fit up to 4 in that one. It really made a massive difference to, this package.
And maybe just to add to what Ruth was talking about and what Marissa said, I think the one point that kind of people miss when you think about sustainability and carbon is sometimes some of these decisions are also cheaper. It doesn't always have an uplift of price. And I think sometimes that's important. And sometimes those decisions mean that things aren't as pretty and they're not as luxurious, but they have a cost saving and a carbon saving. And I think it's always about, from a business perspective, also finding the things that you can do that also have the potential to save the business money as well. And I think prioritizing those makes it easier sometimes as well. I think recycled packaging sometimes people expect is a lot more expensive, and it's absolutely not. So I think it's also just looking into those things and finding ways that you can make more sustainable choices that are not necessarily more expensive for businesses as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I thought was so interesting about Vaayu, is that it's not, as we've already discussed, it's not just what you do after the fact. You can sort of say, well, we could choose this option, we could choose this option, we could choose this option, and it kind of, you see what your options are before you make that decision. Can you tell us a bit about that now?
Sure. I think that's exactly what we've talked about, which is how do you be preventative rather than reactive to the situation, and how do you prevent the carbon from coming into the atmosphere before it does, because that's actually what we're all trying to do, right? And I think building up these scenarios has been very much about understanding those impacts of businesses based on real data. So if you consolidate things at a certain warehouse or in a certain part of the world, what impact will that have? If you change your packaging based on the volume that the business has, and every business is different, every business has different volume, as Marissa mentioned, that sits under it. It has different materials, different packaging materials. And I think when you kind of look at that for each specific business based on their data, you get an absolutely different result for each business. And I think that's what's really important, because we've relied so much on estimates and generalized data that it hasn't been specific enough to the business use case, and therefore hasn't been something we can use in a preventative way. When you rely on real accurate data, then you can also say, if we make these small tweaks, what is the impact that that will have on our whole footprint based on our volume, based on the data of our business? And I think that's really, really important and powerful, because that can change the way we think about some of the decisions we make as businesses. And we're starting to see with different brands that KPI being measured across different parts of the business as well. So supply chain and logistics teams also thinking about carbon. So they think of time, they think of cost, they think of carbon. So trying to add that into the way businesses also think about their actual core business, and adding carbon as basically a KPI or a metric that you actually measure.
And Graham, if I may build on what Nam has just said, it's also a huge opportunity for business innovation, right? Mm-hmm. I think, we have Marissa talking about being predominantly a direct-to-consumer business. I do a lot of work with brands that have been around for centuries, some of them. And there is something to be said about the transition from being in a physical shelf into being in a digital shelf, right? What most legacy brands struggle with today is that they have been historically designing products for the physical shelf. And some of those products may not translate as well to the digital shelf and to the transport needs of the digital shelf, right? I think about the case of home care detergents, right? They've built big, heavy packages with liquid formulas. A lot of the brand challenges that are coming into the space are using different formulations, different packagings that are smaller, that are lighter, that are easier to transport, and they are winning consumers because of that product innovation. We believe that there is a phenomenal space to be explored for a brand within that innovation space around material selection, around product development, that many companies are not tapping into as aggressively as they probably should. And that stands to bring huge opportunities for differentiation and for driving preference and willingness to pay amongst the consumer base down the line.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think what's really hard is finding the time and the space as, a brand to find, to be able to focus on innovation. And we're always saying, how can we make sure we're focusing on enough? Because we'd love to look beyond even recycled metals and what different materials can we use that would be really different, for the consumer, for us, that, would be interesting to work with. And I wish there was more, I know that there's a platform that Pangaea used when they they were using, brand materials that were, all, sustainably made. And that was really interesting. And I wish we had the same for jewelry. So we all need to just, find the time to explore those avenues, because that's probably one of the most important, outlets as well.
Ruth, not Ruth, Marissa, I know when we were speaking in preparation for this, in line with that, we were talking about how sometimes, at the end of the day, you're a designer and you're a creator, and you want to be as creative as you can, but you also kind of have to balance that with, you know, you can't always make you might want to use a material or something and or packaging as we've discussed, and but you can't, or you don't, that's not necessarily the right choice. How do you deal with that, or are you dealing with that?
I mean, I think we as a brand now have a new mission this year, which is actually to design less. And we think that by having, don't get me wrong, you know, everyone's going to be like, what are you talking about? There's still so many products, there's so many new designs. But honestly, on our roadmap, we are now looking at the next year and trying to actually design less and just design better. Because sometimes, you know, if you let your creativity run free, which I always do, everyone, you know, you end up doing more, working sort of harder. Every department ends up being busier, but also then there's too much choice for the customer. Now, if we reduce that, then we're reducing what we're designing, we have more time to innovate and to research what else we could be doing, what other materials. And I think that's also part of changing your mindset, rather than just constantly be, you know, sort of hamsters in a wheel, which is what we often feel like. So I think we're definitely looking at designing less and designing better. And that's one of our sort of, you know, now new mottos moving forward. And actually, I think it helps the entire supply chain and the entire team. So we're really looking forward to that.
Maybe just to add to that, something that we've seen obviously changing in the space around fashion specifically is just kind of e-commerce and buying second life clothing and kind of all of that material moving around the ecosystem. Yeah. And I think that's something we're seeing changing quite dramatically. And I think one thing that we're looking at as Vaayu is essentially, what is the impact of that change? How much do you avoid emissions when you move things around? How much do you save by doing that? And the more times you do that and the more lives you add to the product, how much carbon do you save every time? Yeah. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in kind of understanding those impacts of all of these kind of new, more circular business models, and being able to quantify that to also help the customers understand, if they resell a garment, how much carbon do they save by doing that, and how important it is that we keep things in circulation for a lot longer and larger amounts of time. And I think from a data perspective, there's a lot we can do around kind of e-commerce and a lot of the new circular business models as well.
And so we have a whole project on, you know, circularity at the moment, and we're looking at all of our different options, right? For whether it's dead stock, returns, etc. And we're like, okay, if we melt it down here, where can it go? Right? Can we put it into this project and, you know, I don't know, support up and coming, you know, designers, or do we, you know, do a limited edition designed with the upcycled? And then we look at, oh, but then if we had to send that back, what would that mean in terms of the, you know, carbon footprint? Oh, doesn't that go against what we're trying to do? So we're having all these discussions, and look, we're not there yet, to be honest. But the point is, we're having these discussions. We've set ourselves a project. You know, we're looking at all the different options and weighing up what, you know, what is the right avenue to take. And it's really important for us all. We'll be looking at upcycling and that circularity.
This is one of the areas that excites me the most as an advisor to brands, because
come and advise me anytime. I need help.
Because it really opens up the door to extending the relationship that you have with your end customer, right? Nama and I talk about this a lot around this redefinition of loyalty, particularly in the retail space. I think loyalty feels a bit tired when it comes to retail and fashion. You know, people buying more for the sake of getting a few points or a few discounts here and there. It's just not cutting it for a lot of consumers. And so I think there's an opportunity for us to redefine loyalty in this space. And I think the door opens up when you start looking at coupling product and service in the offering design. I saw that come up very successfully when I did work within financial services. You know, when you have a commoditized product, you don't want to be competing in terms of rate levels with other peers. And so you start layering service on top of that, whether that's digital services, as some of the neobanks have done, or just better consumer experience for more of the legacy brands. I think we are starting to enter a very similar space within the fashion industry, with circularity playing a very big role on that, and with brands having the opportunity to understand the customer beyond just that purchase, right? They can get to understand how they use the product, how frequently where the product perhaps fails, where it breaks, where it doesn't have the resilience that they want, and then start to bring about services that help you connect with consumers even at the post-purchase stage, and to improve, that circularity, that use phase of that. Patagonia has done this very well in a way that's really caught many people's attention, with encouraging people not to buy any more of their products. And so I think for me, this is a new horizon, like evolving the business model by starting to couple product and service. And that makes me really excited. And I think it's sustainability that's driving this.
Definitely.
Yeah, lots to do. I mean, it's exciting how much there is to explore, and we're excited to, make the right decisions as we go. And I think we will make mistakes, but I think as long as you're always trying, there's so much, there's so much to be doing.
Well, that made me, Ruth, what you were saying about brands like Patagonia, who are essentially, in some ways, telling people to buy less or to not buy at all. How can we, as businesses, an industry that wants to grow and wants to be profitable and wants to expand, how can you balance, or can you even balance that kind of the purpose element with the profit element? Just for the illustration there. Does anyone? I mean, I know it's an impossible question, but Ruth, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm very passionate about that question, Graham, as you know from our prep sessions. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding in the business community that sustainability comes at an expense of profitability. I believe it's quite the opposite, right? There's opportunities in terms of bottom line improvements, so becoming more efficient. And that's where we have done a lot of work with our artificial intelligence capability to help companies understand how to drive those optimizations in business, and through that save money and generate increases in margin and savings for the business. So that's a huge opportunity that I think is being untapped by many companies. But there's equally opportunities from a top line growth perspective, right? And again, Patagonia is a great example of that. The ability that they have to drive differentiation, to really connect with their consumer base by acting differently, by taking a different stance to a vast majority of the industry, is proof that these strategies work. But you have to be authentic about them. You have to put the investment into place, and you have to be thinking about the impact that those decisions have on a much longer term horizon, which for a lot of businesses is difficult, because particularly when it pertains to brand decisions, the CMO is one of the shortest tenured roles within the C-suite. And a lot of these investments will not pay off within a quarter or a couple of months, right? They will take much longer than that. So it requires a lot of bravery from the executive function to be able to support that. We see that day in and day out. Unilever is one of our biggest clients, and poor Alan Jope is constantly being criticized for putting profit before purpose. I think that dialogue is a little bit tired. I think we need to start thinking differently, and I would encourage anyone on this webinar to have the bravery to stand up and say, actually, it can be different. We've seen incredible results for that, and again, the fact that NAM and Vaayu are being so successful at driving that carbon calculation piece is testament to us entering a new stage in how we do business.
And I would only add to what Ruth has said, of course, to say that I think the authenticity is very, very important. And I think we're starting to see businesses understand that you need to be authentic. It's not just about communicating a message, but rather living those values. So what we're seeing a lot, which we see as the space kind of evolves and changes, is we see businesses spending a lot more time on their own calculation, on their own carbon footprint, on their own optimization before starting to communicate that with customers. And I think that's really important, because it's kind of having your house in order, understanding your impact, optimizing your impact. And we're starting to see that taken really seriously, big decisions from a business perspective being made because it has carbon saving. And I think that is, as Ruth said, we're seeing a new time, we're seeing a new business, and we're seeing customers engage with those stories and want to hear that from businesses. And I think that's the difference from something that we were talking about even 2 to 3 years ago. I think customers, you didn't hear that rhetoric as much, and you're hearing it all the time. And I think that's important, that brands listen to what customers are asking for and kind of change from the inside out.
Yeah, I think absolutely. It's all about start from within. That's what we've always said. And, I often look at what the team are requesting, and we try and, live, breathe everything internally before you do anything, as you just said, externally. And also whatever is important to the team is important to our customer. A lot of the team are our customer, but they're also the ones that if they are passionate about what we're doing, then we know it will resonate with our customer as well. So, it has to be something that comes from within.
Yeah. Kind of what you've touched on there about being authentic and getting a house in order, that kind of, we've had a few questions from the audience that meant, and as we've mentioned right at the beginning, brands and retailers can be quite scared in this space because they don't want to be accused of greenwashing. I wondered if the panel has any wisdom or advice on that, or
I think as specific as possible. I think we've definitely been scared, I think, in the past about sort of saying anything. And I think we haven't said enough about what we were doing, because we just assumed that, well, that was the norm, that, we should all be doing that. But also I think that what we learned, and, is that if you are very specific, so when we talk about, right, we are carbon, compensating on deliveries and returns, whereas a lot of other people say we're carbon neutral. So no, they might be carbon neutral on deliveries or on deliveries and returns. So I think you just need to be as specific as possible. I think it's when there's ambiguity that, you're basically in a gray area that could be considered, greenwashing. So I think that's what we always try to do.
I love that advice, Marissa, and I would echo it. There's 17 sustainable development goals that any given company at any given point in time could be investing in. And if you think about trying to do all 17 incredibly well, it is a daunting prospect. And so we end up having the opposite of what we would like to see, which is we start entering paralysis because there's just so many different things that you could do. I think having that focus, as you suggest, Marissa, is very important. Being able to start and then grow and communicate that authentically to consumers is absolutely key. But I would say we are always going to be in a much better place when the effort takes place and when we start taking action.
Yeah. We lost you
and
again.
if we are paralyzed, and this is partly because I have had to go through.
Oh no.
Am I back?
Yep, you're back.
Now you're back. Maybe not.
Right.
Maybe the only thing I was going to add and maybe jump in there and say is, I think one thing I would say is there is a lot of legislation coming through in Europe around green claims and around what you can say. And we've seen that come through in the UK. We're seeing it come through in Denmark. And I think it's important to be aware of that legislation. So we obviously work with lawyers and legal teams to ensure that everything that we put out from our platform perspective is legal. All the claims that you can make are legal, and that's what you need to be doing. So I think the legislative landscape is also changing. So I think it's important to keep an eye on that and understand what you can say and what you can't say. I think it's starting a lot of, as Marissa mentioned, this kind of ambiguous words you can't use anymore. And I think there is tighter and tighter legislation coming through. So you need to be really, really precise about what you're communicating and what exactly you're doing. And that specificity we've never needed before. And I also think customers now understand some of that specificity. So I think it's even more important. So both from a kind of legislative perspective, but also from a customer perspective.
And to be as transparent as possible. I mean, we've just added an extra layer, let's say, about our factories, what each one is doing, how many employees, which, obviously they're all RJC audited, but that's the minimum. What does that mean? And what are the different social welfare initiatives they're doing? Or what are the different, health and safety precautions they're taking? So what we're trying to do is give as much transparency. What charitable initiatives are they doing? What recycling initiatives are they doing? And I think it's just trying to be as transparent as possible. Yes, give as much information is possible without obviously overwhelming. That's always been, a challenge as well, because as you said, there's so much.
Yeah, I guess that's we've gone full circle. That's where technology and data are going to really drive and help in this space. I know Ruth has a good opinion on this, but I'm not sure how are you back? But maybe I'll take that to you first, Nam. This is looking ahead to the future. We're talking about about the progress we can make, but it is going to be those the real digging into the data and the technology that's going to really help drive this forward, is it?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if Ruth wants to start. Are you working, Ruth? No. Okay, maybe I go. So obviously, we think technology plays a very strong role in kind of what we can do and the improvements we can make. I think we haven't had enough technology developed in the space. I think we haven't had enough solutions. And I think it's time that some of these kind of difficult problems that we've been trying to solve, we also use technology to solve them. I don't think technology solves everything. The problems still remain difficult. They're still about authenticity. They're still about understanding. They're still about changing businesses. But I think technology can help understand the impact. And I think data plays a really, really key part in doing that. And I think understanding impact is something we haven't been able to do at scale. And we think technology plays a very large role in being able to give brands what they need to make some of those decisions and understand some of those impacts. So obviously, we have a very strong view on the role of technology there.
Marissa, I wondered your thoughts. You're very. I love your openness and your honesty, and you're starting your journey. You're doing what you can. How is it helping you?
I think it gives us the confidence in the decisions we're making. And I mean, I am a bit of a data freak as well. So we have our own data analysts in-house for, all our e-com or tech decisions. And so this is another layer of data that helps us make the most responsible decisions. And so for me, when we're sitting around making, decisions on, as you say, whether it's the packaging, whether it's the, deliveries, the more data you have and the more you can see what that difference will be, as you say, every litter on every parcel, it really gives you the confidence in making decisions. So yeah, that's one of the most important things.
I'm gonna give this a go. Hopefully the internet's with me. We believe that technology can be a phenomenal enabler of change, and we've seen that in varied parts of the work that we do. I get very excited when I see industries that are starting to pivot into a technology-enabled model, because that tells me that we can start deriving some scale from action, right? The work that we do with Vaayu is the perfect example of that. Because they have invested in building a machine-readable database, we can then automate that data collection, automate the carbon footprint calculation, and free up human time to actually focus on implementing those recommendations, which I personally believe is the better use of the time. Moreover, it gives us that feedback loop that allows us to align actions as we learn more. So that agility is particularly key for some of the organizations that we work with, because that enables us to adapt and to really dip in and out of different programs and dial things up, quite literally move those levers as we need to achieve those net zero targets. That for me is very, very.
And also
about freeing up resources. Sorry, that's a really good point, because the manual hours that would take, the opportunity, therefore, that gives someone, as you say, to focus on what we were saying we never have time to, which is innovation and change, for the greater, for the greater good, if you are going to focus on those sustainability challenges.
Now we're almost out of time, and we do have some questions from the audience that we haven't had a chance to get to, but I will make sure I get those answered from the panel, and I will email those answers out to our audience members. We've covered quite a lot there, but I did sort of want to wrap up. This is a thing I often do at the end of these, is to sum up, or to maybe, if you have one piece of advice for our audience, is there anything that you want to leave on a note? Marissa, what about you?
I think accountability. I think we need to all be accountable for our actions, and I think really that's what Vaayu helps us feel with the with this particular carbon compensation project. And then transparency. You need to be really transparent with your customer on what you are doing, what you're not able to do, what your goals are. And even just, I've been really inspired by this conversation. And I think now there's so many other, projects, for us to work on, because, I think you're right about the authenticity. I think there's, a lot that we need to do to focus on the innovation. But yeah, I think that would be it.
Ruth, what about you?
I was going to say collaboration and kindness. And the reason I say that is because this is a relatively new space, right? And I feel that legacy brands are making big efforts to try to evolve the way in which they've done things. And if we continuously criticize those efforts, we enter into that fear paralysis, which I think doesn't get us anywhere. Right? I've just answered that question in the Q&A chat, and so I'm referring to that as well. Everyone is making a huge effort, some better than others. As long as we continue to take action, and that action is well informed, and to Marissa's points, we hold ourselves accountable, we are transparent with the consumer, and we continue to push forward, I genuinely believe that as a collective, we will deliver on this. Mm-hmm. The moment we start attacking each other, the moment we stop listening, then this is when sustainability gets really hard, because it is one of those wicked problems. So my advice would be, let's be kind, and let's extend that hand and collaborate, because that's how we will get results.
Very good advice.
Yeah.
I'll be brief. I know we're out of time, so I would just say start. And I think whether it's a project, whether it's piece of work, whatever it is, I think we need action, and whether that's small or big, we need people to start taking steps. So that would be my advice.
Perfect. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Marissa, Nama, Ruth. Thank you to Vaayu, our partner on today's webinar, and thank you to our audience for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.